My mom told me you had to come. Where is she? Daniel Hayes asked instantly, already pushing his chair back. What happened? Annie, where's your mother? The little girl stood in the doorway of his study, chest rising and falling too fast for someone her size. In the back garden, Annie said, swallowing hard. She told me to find you. She said you would come. Daniel was already moving. What's going on? He pressed, stepping around the desk. Is she hurt? Annie shook her head, then hesitated. Not like that, she said quietly. But Mrs. Hayes is... She stopped, like the rest of the sentence didn't feel safe. Daniel's jaw tightened. Is Victoria out there? Annie nodded. She started this morning, Annie said, forcing the words out. She told Mama to clean the garden, but it wasn't cleaning. She was saying things, mean things. Daniel's expression shifted. What kind of things? Annie didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward and reached for his hand. Please, she said, tugging gently. You have to come now. She said you'd help. She said if you saw it, you wouldn't let it happen. Daniel didn't hesitate. All right, he said. I'm coming. But Annie pulled harder, urgency overtaking politeness. No now, she insisted. Please. Walk faster. And then she turned, leading him out into the hallway. They had barely made it 10 steps when a figure stepped into their path. Sir. The voice was calm, controlled. Daniel slowed. Mr. Whitaker, the house manager, stood near the base of the staircase, hands neatly clasped. I'm going to the garden, Daniel said. Whitaker inclined his head slightly. There's no need for concern, sir. Mrs. Hayes is simply giving instructions. Routine matters. Annie's fingers tightened around Daniel's hand. It's not routine, she whispered. Whitaker continued, measured and composed. Mrs. Hayes is only assigning additional work to Miss Brooks. Seasonal maintenance. Nothing that requires your attention. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. How long has she been out there? A short while, sir. Annie looked up at Daniel quickly, then leaned closer. Her voice low but urgent. He's trying to slow you down, she said. He doesn't want you to go. Whitaker's expression barely changed, but Daniel saw it. A flicker. A pause too small for anyone else to notice. Annie swallowed and held tighter to Daniel's sleeve. You have to come, she said again, more firmly now. Mom said so. She said you have to come. Whitaker spoke again, a final attempt. Sir, I truly believe this is unnecessary. Mrs. Hayes would not appreciate. I'm not asking what she appreciates. Daniel's voice was calm, but Annie stepped in front of him slightly, as if she could shield him from the delay itself. He's doing it again, she said quickly, looking up at Daniel. He's trying to keep you here. Mama said this might happen. Her small voice didn't shake now. She said if someone tries to stop you, it means you really need to come. Daniel didn't move. She told me to tell you that, Annie added, her eyes fixed on his. She said you'd understand. Whitaker straightened slightly. Sir, with respect, Annie didn't wait. She tugged Daniel's hand again, more urgently this time. Please, she said. We have to go now. She needs you. Daniel stepped forward. Whitaker moved aside. The hallway opened in front of them again, wide and quiet, and perfectly arranged like nothing important had ever happened there. They walked faster now. What happened this morning? Daniel asked. Mrs. Hayes called Mama outside, Annie said. Said the garden looked messy. But it didn't. The gardener already fixed it yesterday. Daniel's brows drew together. She gave Mama a rake anyway, Annie continued. Told her to do it again, but she didn't leave. She just stood there, watching. Her voice dropped, and then she started saying things. Daniel's jaw tightened. Like what? Annie hesitated, then said. She said, Mama doesn't belong here. That people like us should remember where we stand. Silence followed them for a few steps. And your mother? Daniel asked. She didn't say anything, Annie replied. She just kept working. That was worse. They reached the glass doors. Annie pushed one open, cool autumn air rushing in. Come on, she said again. Please. Daniel stepped outside. The garden stretched before them, perfect, controlled, untouched, except for one place. Victoria stood near the far edge, composed as always, her posture effortless, her presence sharp even in stillness. Clara stood across from her, working, A rake moved through leaves that had already been gathered once. Daniel slowed. Annie stopped beside him. "That's her," she said softly. "That's where Mama is." Daniel stepped forward. Victoria turned. "Daniel," she said lightly. "I didn't expect you out here." Clara didn't look up. Daniel's gaze moved between them. "What's going on here?" he asked. Victoria smiled. "It's nothing," she said. "Just a bit of work." Daniel looked at the garden again. He looked back at Clara. At the tension in her shoulders, Daniel moved closer instead. Victoria watched him approach, composed as ever, her posture flawless, her expression just short of amused. "Really, Daniel?" she said lightly, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve. "There's no need to interrupt. I was simply making sure things were done properly." Daniel stopped a few feet away. "What needed to be done properly?" he asked. Victoria tilted her head, as if the answer were obvious. "The garden," she said. "It's late in the season. Leaves pile up quickly. You know how appearances matter." Daniel let his gaze drift across the space. He looked back at Clara. "Did I ask you to do this?" he said. Clara hesitated, then finally lifted her eyes. "No," she answered quietly. Victoria let out a soft breath, almost amused. "Daniel, must everything go through you? This is a household, not a boardroom." Daniel's eyes shifted to her. "No," he said. "It's my house." Victoria's smile remained, but it no longer softened her face. "Of course it is," she said. "Which is exactly why I'm maintaining a certain standard." Clara lowered the rake slightly, as if suddenly aware of how tightly she had been holding it. "I can finish," she said, her voice steady but thin. "It's fine." Daniel didn't look at her. "It's not fine." Victoria's expression sharpened. "This really isn't necessary," she said. "You're making something out of nothing." Daniel stepped forward. "It stopped being nothing when I had to come find you. If this moment made you feel something deep inside, take a second to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where you are watching from. And if stories like this matter to you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Stories that stay with you long after they end." Victoria's eyes flicked, briefly, to Annie. "Well," she said coolly, "perhaps someone should teach her not to wander into private areas of the house." Annie didn't move, but Daniel felt her presence behind him steady, unafraid. "She went where she needed to go," he said. Victoria's lips pressed together, irritation beginning to surface beneath control. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is hardly—" "What did you say to her?" The question cut clean through her sentence. Victoria blinked once. "I beg your pardon?" "To Clara," Daniel said, his voice calm but final. "What did you say?" "Nothing that wasn't true," Victoria replied. Clara's fingers tightened again around the rake. Daniel noticed. "Then say it again," he said. Victoria let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. "Daniel, I'm not going to stand here and repeat myself like this is some kind of—" "Say it." Victoria studied him carefully. Then she straightened, her voice cooling into something sharper, more deliberate. "I said," she began, "that Miss Brooks should remember the nature of her position, that this is a professional arrangement, not a social one." Daniel didn't miss it. "And?" he asked. Victoria's gaze flicked toward Clara, then back to him. "And that familiarity can create confusion," she continued, "which I do not tolerate in my home." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "And the garden?" he asked. Victoria gestured toward the rake. "I asked her to redo the work. It wasn't satisfactory." Daniel looked down, then back at Clara. "Was it satisfactory yesterday?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said quietly. "And who checked it?" "The gardener." Daniel nodded once, then looked at Victoria. "So this wasn't about the garden. It wasn't a question." Victoria's eyes hardened now. "You're choosing to interpret this in a very dramatic way," she said. "I'm maintaining standards, that's all." Daniel held her gaze. "No," he said. "You're making a point." Victoria stepped forward. "And what if I am?" she asked, more personal now. "Why are you so concerned, Daniel? Why her?" Victoria continued, her tone tightening. "Why are you defending her?" Daniel didn't answer. Victoria's voice sharpened. "She's a housekeeper," she said. "I am your wife, and yet here you are," she went on, her gaze cutting between him and Clara. "Standing in my garden, taking her side. Victoria's next words came slower. Or is there something I should know? Daniel's eyes didn't move. What do you mean? He asked. Victoria let out a small breath, something close to a laugh, but without warmth. Don't insult me, she said. I saw you last night. Daniel didn't react outwardly, but something inside him stilled completely. In the hallway, Victoria continued. The way you looked at her, do you think I wouldn't notice? Victoria took another step closer. So I'll ask you again, she said quietly, her voice now stripped of pretense. Why are you helping her? Her eyes locked onto his. Or is this not about helping at all? Is there something going on between you and her? She asked. Something you've been keeping from me? The accusation didn't come loud. Clara shook her head immediately. No, but Daniel raised a hand slightly, not to silence her, to stop the moment from collapsing into something smaller than it already was. Victoria watched that gesture. Daniel exhaled slowly, then stepped past her, closed the distance between himself and Clara, and reached for the rake. Clara looked at him, startled. Give it to me, he said. I can finish, she insisted quietly. No. The rake passed into his hands. Daniel turned, dragged it once through the leaves, twice, then stopped. He dropped it. The sound broke the silence cleanly. This ends now, he said. Victoria's expression shifted. You don't get to decide that alone, she replied. Daniel looked at her. I just did. Behind him, Annie moved closer to Clara, slipping her small hand into her mother's. Clara held it tightly. Victoria saw everything, every detail. Daniel didn't move. For a moment, no one did. The rake lay on the ground between them. A simple tool turned into a line no one had expected to cross. Victoria was the first to recover. Of course she was. She let out a slow breath, smoothing her coat as if the conversation had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience, something easily folded away and forgotten. But her eyes had changed. You've made your point, she said, her voice calm again, but thinner now, stretched over something sharper underneath. There's no need to turn this into a spectacle. Daniel didn't respond. He was looking at Clara, really looking at her now, at the way she stood, not weak, not broken, but contained. Like someone who had learned long ago that surviving often meant saying nothing at all. Her hands were still dirty, her shoulders still tight, and yet she hadn't defended herself. Not once. Something about that unsettled him more than anything Victoria had said. Clara, he said quietly. She looked at him. Just for a second. What happened this morning? He asked. Victoria's head turned slightly. Daniel, I asked her. The interruption was clean, controlled. Clara hesitated. Her instinct was clear. Minimize, deflect, end it quickly. It's nothing, she said softly. Just work. Daniel shook his head once. No, he said. It's not. Silence settled again. Annie's hand tightened around her mother's fingers. Clara felt it, closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. And this time, she answered, she asked me to redo the garden, Clara said, her voice steady but quiet. I told her it was already done. She said it didn't meet her standards. Victoria didn't interrupt. Not yet, Clara continued. She stayed, she added. Watched. Corrected things that weren't wrong. A pause. And then? Daniel asked. Clara's gaze dropped, just slightly. She said I should be careful, she said. That people in my position shouldn't forget. Boundaries. The word lingered. Carefully chosen, carefully repeated. Daniel's jaw tightened. And that's all? He asked. Clara hesitated, then shook her head. She said I was getting too comfortable. She added quietly. Behind her, Annie shifted. Daniel noticed. And? He asked again. Clara didn't want to say it. That much was obvious. But Annie's hand didn't let go, and something in Daniel's expression didn't allow escape either. She said. Clara continued, her voice lower now. That comfort can make people forget where they belong. There it was, spoken out loud, no longer controlled by tone or implication, just truth. Daniel didn't look at Victoria immediately. Instead, he let the words sit, let them exist fully in the space. Then, he turned. Victoria met his gaze without flinching. Well, she said. You wanted to hear it. There was no apology in her voice, no regret, only justification. You said that to her, Daniel said. Victoria lifted one shoulder slightly. I said what needed to be said. Daniel studied her. For a long moment, you humiliated her, he said. Victoria's expression hardened. I corrected her, she replied. There's a difference. No, Daniel said. There isn't. The air shifted again. Not tension this time. Something deeper. Something final. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You're being unreasonable, she said. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Daniel almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. I've been using judgment to avoid emotion for a long time, he said quietly. It hasn't worked out well. That caught her off guard. Just slightly. Enough. Victoria straightened. So what exactly is this, Daniel? She asked. A sudden crisis of conscience, or something more personal? Her gaze flicked, briefly, to Clara, then back. You didn't answer my question earlier, she continued. About you and her. Clara stiffened. Victoria, she iterated, but Victoria cut her off. No, she said sharply. I'd like to hear it from him. Daniel didn't look away. There's nothing going on now, he said. The wording was careful. Precis. Victoria caught it immediately. Now, she repeated softly. A pause. How interesting. Clara stepped back slightly, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. Daniel, she said quietly. You don't need to. I do. The word came out before she finished, and it surprised all of them, including him. He exhaled slowly, then spoke again, more evenly. I should have said something a long time ago, he said. Victoria's expression sharpened. About what? She asked. Daniel looked at her, then at Clara, then back. We knew each other, he said. Before. Silence. Total. Victoria didn't move. Define new, she said. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. We were together, he said. Clara closed her eyes. Annie looked up at her mother, confused, sensing the weight of something she didn't fully understand. Victoria's face went very still. How long? She asked. Years ago, Daniel said. Before any of this. He gestured vaguely toward the house, toward the life he had built. Victoria let out a slow breath. And you thought that was irrelevant? She asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. No, he said finally. I thought it was over. Victoria's lips curved, but there was no warmth in it. And now? The question hung there. Clara stepped forward slightly. Victoria, this isn't... But Victoria raised a hand, stopping her without even looking. I'm not speaking to you, she said. Her eyes stayed on Daniel. Well? She pressed. Daniel met her gaze. This, he said slowly, isn't about what you think it is. Victoria let out a quiet laugh. It never is, she said. A long silence followed. Then, she stepped back. Just one step, but it changed everything. Fine, she said. The word was light. Too light. If this is how you want to handle it, we'll handle it. Daniel watched her carefully. He recognized that tone. Not anger. Not chaos. Control. Recalculation. She turned slightly, smoothing her coat again. This isn't finished, she said. Not a threat. A statement. Then she looked at Clara, and for the first time, there was no pretense at all. You should go inside, she said coldly. You've done enough for today. Clara didn't move, not until Daniel gave the smallest nod. Then she turned. Annie went with her instantly, still holding her hand. Daniel stayed where he was, watching. Victoria paused as she passed him. You've made a choice, she said quietly. Daniel didn't look at her. Yes, he replied. She studied him for a moment longer, then walked back toward the house. Alone, eh? The garden fell silent again, but it wasn't the same silence. Something had been uncovered, something that had been buried under years of decisions, compromises, and carefully maintained appearances. Daniel stood there for a long moment. Then he looked down at his hands, still clean, untouched. For now, he exhaled slowly, and for the first time in a very long time, he understood exactly what it was going to cost to do the right thing, and he knew he was going to do it anyway. He turned toward the house and followed them inside. Daniel found her in the kitchen, not immediately. At first, the house felt too large again, hallways stretching longer than they should, the quiet pressing in the way it used to before anything had changed. Before Annie had shown up at his study door with dirt on her hands and certainty in her voice, now that same quiet felt different, heavier, earned. Clara stood by the sink, sleeves rolled just past her wrists, rinsing something that didn't need rinsing. The motion was slow, Automatic, the kind of movement people fall into when they need their hands to be busy so their thoughts don't take over. Annie sat at the small table near the window, swinging her legs slightly, watching her mother with the same focused attention she gave everything that mattered. No one spoke when Daniel stepped in. Clara sensed him before she turned. She always had. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, without looking up. Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't grateful either. Just tired. Daniel closed the door behind him. "I should have done it sooner," he replied. Clara shook her head slightly, still facing the sink. "No," she said. "You shouldn't have done it at all." Annie looked between them. "Mom," she said softly. "He helped." Clara turned then. Quickly. "Annie," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Go wash your hands, sweetheart." Annie hesitated. "But..." Now, it wasn't harsh, but it wasn't a suggestion either. Annie slid off the chair, glancing once at Daniel before moving toward the small bathroom down the hall. The moment she was gone, the room shifted. The air changed. Clara dried her hands slowly, then turned fully to face him. "You shouldn't have said anything," she repeated. Daniel leaned slightly against the counter. "Why?" he asked. Clara let out a quiet breath. "Because now it's real," she said. Daniel frowned slightly. "It was always real." "No," she said, shaking her head. "It was contained." The word sat there, carefully chosen. "We had distance," she continued. "We had silence. That was enough." Daniel studied her. "It wasn't enough for you this morning." Clara's expression flickered. "Just for a second." "That's different," she said. "How?" "Because that was work." Daniel almost smiled. "That wasn't work." Clara didn't answer, because she knew he was right. The silence stretched. Then she looked at him again. "You told her," she said, "about us." It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't look away. "Yes." Clara closed her eyes briefly. "Daniel, I wasn't going to let her turn this into something it's not," he said. "And what is it?" Clara asked quietly. That stopped him. Not because he didn't have an answer, because he had too many. Clara watched him. "You think telling the truth makes things cleaner," she said. "It doesn't. It makes them honest. It makes them dangerous." Her voice didn't rise, but the weight in it deepened. Daniel straightened slightly. "It was already dangerous," he said. "You were standing out there being..." "Don't." The word came quick, firm, not angry, just final. He stopped. Clara looked at him steadily now. "I don't need you to protect me," she said. Daniel held her gaze. "I know. Then don't act like I do." A pause. Then, softer. "I've managed," she added. Daniel nodded once. "I know you have." "Then why?" she asked. The question came quietly, not accusing, genuine. "Why step in like that?" Daniel exhaled slowly. He could have given her the easy answer. "Because it was wrong. Because it wasn't fair. Because Annie came to me. All true. None complete. Because I didn't like who I was when I didn't," he said. Clara's expression shifted. Slightly. She hadn't expected that. Daniel looked down briefly, then back at her. "I've spent a long time choosing the easier version of things," he said. "Staying out of situations that weren't mine to deal with." Clara didn't interrupt. "And it didn't make anything better," he added. The kitchen was quiet again, but not tense. Just honest. Clara leaned back against the counter, folding her arms loosely. "You think this makes it better?" she asked. "I think it makes it different." "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." A small silence. Then, "She's not going to let this go," Clara said. Daniel didn't need to ask who she meant. "I know." Clara studied him carefully. "You don't," she said. That caught him. "She won't confront it directly," Clara continued. "Not in a way you can see coming." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "I can handle Victoria." Clara shook her head. "No," she said. "You can't." The certainty in her voice wasn't dismissive. It was experienced. "She doesn't fight to win arguments," Clara went on. "She fights to control outcomes." Daniel didn't respond immediately, because that sounded accurate. Clara watched him understand it. "She won't come after you," she said. Daniel frowned. "Then what?" Clara held his gaze. "She'll come after me." The words settled heavily between them. Daniel pushed off the counter slightly. "That's not going to happen." Clara almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. "You don't get to decide that," she said. Daniel's jaw tightened. I won't let it. Clara stepped closer. Not far. Just enough. This isn't something you can fix by standing in front of it, she said quietly. Daniel didn't move. Clara's voice softened slightly. She'll wait, she said. She'll make it look like nothing happened, and then she'll find a way to remind me exactly where I stand. A pause, and she'll do it in a way you can't argue with. Daniel exhaled slowly. The truth in that was uncomfortable. From the hallway, Annie's footsteps returned. Small, quick. The moment shifted again. Clara stepped back. Distance restored. Annie came back into the kitchen, hands still slightly damp, eyes moving between them. Is everything okay? She asked. Clara nodded immediately. Yes, baby. Annie looked at Daniel. He nodded too. It is, he said. Annie studied him for a moment longer, then accepted it, because she wanted to. Are you staying? She asked. The question came simply, the same way she had asked it before. Not about the moment, about something bigger. Daniel glanced at Clara. Clara didn't look at him. She was watching Annie, waiting. He turned back to the girl. For a little while, he said. Annie nodded, satisfied for now. She climbed back onto her chair, swinging her legs again. Clara moved back to the sink, but this time she stopped halfway, then turned. Daniel, she said. He looked at her. You don't owe me anything, she said. The words were clear, careful, important. Daniel held her gaze. I know, he said. A pause. Then don't do this out of guilt. He shook his head slightly. It's not guilt. Clara searched his face. For a long moment, then nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Then be careful, she said quietly. Daniel almost smiled. I usually am. Clara didn't smile back. That's what worries me. From somewhere deeper in the house, a door closed. Soft. Measured. Daniel felt it more than heard it. Victoria. Moving. Thinking. Waiting. The house wasn't quiet anymore. Not really. It was listening. And for the first time, Daniel realized that whatever had started in the garden was only the beginning. Dinner that evening was quieter than usual. Not empty. Not cold. Just measured. The long dining table, usually a place of routine and quiet order, felt like something else now, like a stage where everyone understood their position. But no one trusted the script anymore. Victoria arrived last. Of course she did. Not late enough to be remarked upon, just late enough to be noticed. She took her seat at the head of the table with the same composed elegance she carried into every room. Her posture flawless, her expression calm. If anyone had walked in without context, they would have seen nothing unusual. That was the point. Daniel watched her as he set his napkin down. Clara moved in silence along the sideboard, placing dishes with steady hands, her eyes lowered, her movements precise. Annie sat near the far end of the table, unusually still, her legs no longer swinging. She felt it too, even if she couldn't name it. Dinner looks lovely, Victoria said, her voice smooth, controlled, as she reached for her glass. Clara inclined her head slightly. Thank you. No tension in the words. No warmth either. Just function. Daniel didn't speak. Not yet. He was watching, listening, waiting. Victoria took a sip of water, then set the glass down gently. I had a call this afternoon, she said casually. The board is finalizing the new expansion proposal. Daniel nodded once. In Chicago? Yes, she said. It's moving faster than expected. A pause. Then, I'll likely need you there next week, she added. Daniel looked up. For how long? Victoria shrugged lightly. A few days. Maybe longer, depending on negotiations. Clara's hand stilled for a fraction of a second as she adjusted a plate, then continued. Daniel noticed. Victoria noticed that he noticed. Of course, she went on smoothly. I understand if your schedule has changed. The word hung there, carefully chosen. Daniel met her gaze. My schedule hasn't changed, he said. Victoria smiled faintly. Good, she replied. Consistency is important. Silence returned. Forks moved. Plates shifted. The small sounds of a meal continuing as if nothing had shifted beneath it. Annie looked from one adult to another. Then, Mr. Hayes? She said softly. Daniel turned his head. Yes, Annie. She hesitated. Then, are you going to be here tomorrow? The question was simple, but it landed heavier than it should have. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Victoria set her fork down. Not loudly. Just deliberately. Daniel didn't look away from Annie. Yes, he said. I will. Annie nodded. Satisfied, she returned to her plate. Victoria picked her fork back up. How reassuring, she said lightly. Daniel's gaze shifted to her. Victoria didn't look at him. Not yet. She cut her food with careful precision. I suppose it's nice, she continued, to know exactly where people intend to be. Clara's shoulders tightened slightly. Daniel set his fork down. Say what you want to say, he said. Victoria paused, then looked up, directly at him. I thought I just did. No, Daniel said. You implied it. Victoria leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression calm. Interested. As opposed to you? She asked. You've been very direct today. Daniel didn't respond. Victoria's gaze shifted briefly to Clara, then back. I'm simply adjusting, she said. New information requires new perspectives. Clara stepped forward slightly. Mrs. Hayes, if there's anything you need. I don't need anything, Victoria said, cutting her off without raising her voice. The interruption was clean. Practiced. Clara fell silent. Victoria turned her attention back to Daniel. You've made things very clear, she said. Daniel held her gaze. Good. Victoria studied him for a long moment, then smiled. A real smile this time, but not a kind one. Clarity can be useful, she said. It helps people understand their position. Clara's hand tightened around the serving spoon. Annie looked up again. Daniel saw it, and something in him shifted. No, he said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. No? It helps people understand the truth, Daniel said. Victoria tilted her head slightly. And what truth is that? Daniel didn't hesitate. That no one here is less than anyone else. The words landed. Clean. Final. Clara went very still. Victoria's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Subtly. Sharpened. That's a very generous perspective, she said. It's not a perspective, Daniel replied. It's a fact. Victoria leaned forward slightly now. Interested again. Engaged. And yet, she said softly, this entire house operates on structure. A pause. Roles. Expectations. Boundaries. Her eyes flicked to Clara again. Then back. You don't get to erase that because it makes you uncomfortable. Daniel's voice stayed even. I'm not uncomfortable. Victoria held his gaze. No, she said. You're reacting. Silence. Then, maybe I am, Daniel said. That caught her. Just slightly. Victoria hadn't expected agreement. And maybe I should have a long time ago. The room went still again. Clara looked down. Annie watched everything. Victoria sat back, studying him, recalculating. Then, she nodded once. Slow. Deliberate. Very well, she said. Her tone shifted again, back to something smoother, more controlled. If this is the direction we're going. She picked up her glass again, took a small sip, then set it down. Then we'll proceed accordingly. Daniel didn't like that. Not the words, the calm behind them. What does that mean? He asked. Victoria smiled faintly. It means, she said, that I understand the situation. A pause, and I will handle it appropriately. Clara's breath caught slightly. Daniel leaned forward. Victoria, but she stood, graceful, composed, ending the conversation without raising her voice. Dinner was lovely, she said, looking at Clara. Thank you, Clara nodded. You're welcome. Victoria turned, walked toward the door, then paused, just before leaving. Without turning back, she said, Annie, you should finish your meal. Annie blinked. Yes, ma'am. Victoria nodded slightly, then left the room. The door closed softly behind her. The silence that followed was different, not tense, not sharp, just aware. Daniel exhaled slowly. Clara didn't move. Annie looked at her plate, then at Daniel. Did I do something wrong? She asked quietly. Daniel's chest tightened. No, he said immediately. You didn't do anything wrong. Annie nodded slowly, but she wasn't entirely convinced. Clara stepped forward then, placing a gentle hand on Annie's shoulder. You're okay, she said softly. Annie leaned into her slightly. Daniel watched them, then looked toward the door Victoria had just walked through. And for the first time, he understood something clearly. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. It wasn't about words in a garden, or truth spoken at the wrong time. Victoria wasn't going to fight this openly. She was going to reshape it, quietly, carefully, in ways that didn't look like conflict at all. Daniel stood slowly. "I'll take care of this," he said. Clara looked up sharply. "No," she said. He met her gaze. "Yes." Clara shook her head. "You don't know what that means yet." Daniel didn't respond, because she was right. He didn't, not fully, but he was beginning to, and whatever it was, it had already started. Daniel didn't go to his study that night. That was the first thing that changed. For years, it had been a habit after dinner, after conversation, after the quiet rituals of a controlled life. He would retreat, close the door, sit behind a desk that faced outward but felt like a wall. Tonight, he didn't. He stayed in the house, moved through it slowly, listening. The staff quarters were quiet, lights dimmed, doors closed, the house settling into its usual rhythm. But beneath that, something else, a shift, not loud, not visible, but present. He found Clara in the laundry room. She was folding linens that had already been folded once he could tell by the crispness of the edges, the unnecessary repetition of the task. Annie was asleep somewhere down the hall. That much was clear from the silence. Clara didn't look up when he entered. "You should go upstairs," she said. Daniel leaned against the doorway. "I will," he replied. "In a minute." Clara continued folding. "Precis, measured. You shouldn't be here," she added. Daniel watched her hands. "They're just sheets," he said. Clara almost smiled. "Everything's just something," she replied. "Until it isn't." That landed. Daniel stepped further into the room. "You think she's already started," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded once. "She started the moment she stopped arguing." Daniel exhaled slowly. He had felt that too. That quiet recalibration. "That call she mentioned at dinner," he said. "Chicago." Clara's hands paused, then resumed. "It's real," she said. "But that doesn't mean it's not useful." Daniel studied her. "You think she's trying to get me out of the house?" Clara didn't look at him. "I think she's trying to control the timing," she said. Daniel frowned slightly. "Timing of what?" Clara set the last folded sheet down, then finally looked at him. "Of how this looks," she said. Daniel didn't immediately understand, so she explained. "She won't push me out directly," Clara said. "Not now. Not after today." "Why not?" "Because now there are witnesses," she replied simply. Daniel thought about that. The garden, the conversation. Annie. "Yes," he said slowly. "There are." Clara nodded. "So she changes the shape of the problem," she continued. "Instead of removing me, she makes it so I have to leave." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen." Clara held his gaze. "You don't know that." "I do." "No," she said quietly. "You don't." The certainty in her voice wasn't defiance. It was experience. "She'll make it look reasonable," Clara went on. "Like a decision that makes sense. Something I can't argue without sounding ungrateful." Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. What would that even look like? Clara didn't answer immediately. She turned back to the table, adjusted a stack of towels that didn't need adjusting, then said, "A transfer." Daniel frowned. "To where?" "Somewhere else," Clara said. "Another property. Another household." A pause. "Better pay. Better conditions. A promotion." Daniel stared at her. "That doesn't sound like punishment." Clara met his eyes again. "That's why it works." Silence. Daniel ran a hand through his hair slowly. "She'd send you away," he said, "and make it look like she was helping you." Clara nodded. "Yes. And you'd go?" The question came sharper than he intended. Clara didn't react to the tone. "I'd have to consider it," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No." Clara's expression softened slightly. Daniel. No," he repeated. "You don't have to go anywhere." Clara stepped closer. "Not far, but enough. This isn't just about me," she said. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara hesitated. Then, "Annie," she said. The name changed everything. Daniel's expression shifted. Clara continued. "She's settled here," she said. "She has a routine, a school nearby, stability." A pause. "And if I refuse something that looks like an opportunity," Daniel understood. "It becomes about her," he finished. Clara nodded. "Yes." Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Real. Daniel looked down, then back up. "She's not going to use your daughter as leverage." Clara didn't answer, because they both knew. That wasn't something anyone could promise. From down the hall, a soft sound, a door shifting. Then, small footsteps. Annie appeared in the doorway, half awake, hair slightly messy, eyes searching. "Mom?" she said softly. Clara turned immediately. "I'm here, baby." Annie walked in, rubbing one eye. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured. Clara knelt down. "Bad dream?" Annie shook her head. "No, just quiet." Clara smiled faintly. "Come here." Annie leaned into her, wrapping her arms around her mother's neck. Then, she looked over Clara's shoulder. At Daniel. "Are you still here?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "I am." Annie seemed to think about that, then said, "Good. Simple. Certain." She rested her head against Clara's shoulder. Clara held her, one hand gently smoothing her hair. Daniel watched them, and something in his chest tightened again. Not discomfort. Something else. Recognition. Clara looked up at him. Over Annie's shoulder, her expression quieter now, less guarded. "This is what she'll use," she said softly. Daniel didn't need her to explain. He saw it, understood it, felt it. Annie shifted slightly, already drifting back towards sleep. "I told you he'd help," she murmured, barely awake. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Daniel didn't move. The room felt smaller now, not physically, emotionally, everything closer, everything more immediate. Clara stood slowly, lifting Annie into her arms. "She should go back to bed," she said. Daniel stepped aside as she passed him. At the doorway, she paused, turned slightly. "Daniel," she said. He looked at her. "If she offers it," Clara continued quietly. "You need to let me decide." Daniel frowned. "That's not—" "It is," she said. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. "I've lived with consequences longer than you have," she added. A pause. "And I won't have someone else choosing them for me." Daniel held her gaze. Long, carefully, then nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Clara watched him for a second longer, then turned, carrying Annie down the hall. Daniel stood alone in the laundry room. The folded sheets, the quiet hum of the house, the weight of something that was no longer simple. He exhaled slowly, and for the first time, he understood that doing the right thing wasn't just about stepping in. It was about knowing when not to, and that might be harder. The next morning arrived too quietly. Not peaceful, not restful, just quiet in the way a house becomes when something unresolved is waiting beneath the surface. Daniel woke earlier than usual. He didn't need an alarm. He hadn't slept long enough to require one. The ceiling above him felt unfamiliar, though nothing had changed. The same room, the same furniture, the same carefully constructed life. And yet, it no longer fit the same way. He sat up slowly, running a hand across his face, letting the silence settle around him. Then he stood, dressed, and instead of heading toward his study, he went downstairs. The kitchen lights were already on. Clara? Of course. She moved the way she always did in the early hours, quiet, efficient, purposeful. Coffee already brewing, bread set out. A rhythm built not for comfort, but for necessity. Daniel paused at the doorway, watched her for a moment. She hadn't seen him yet, or maybe she had, and chose not to acknowledge it. "Morning," he said finally. Clara didn't turn right away. "Good morning," she replied, her voice even. No tension, no softness, just control. Daniel stepped in. "You're up early." Clara almost smiled. "I always am." He nodded. Of course she was. Some habits weren't choices. They were survival. From the hallway, Annie's voice drifted in, sleepy, but determined. "Mom?" Clara turned immediately. "I'm here, baby." Annie appeared seconds later, hair still tangled from sleep, holding the edge of the doorway like she wasn't fully sure she was awake yet. Then she saw Daniel, and smiled. "You stayed." Daniel felt something in his chest shift again. "I said I would." Annie nodded, satisfied. She walked straight to Clara, leaning into her side, small and certain. Clara rested a hand on her shoulder. "Go sit," she said softly. "I'll get your breakfast." Annie obeyed, climbing onto her chair at the small table. Daniel watched the exchange, then turned slightly. "And Victoria?" he asked. Clara's hand paused briefly over the counter. "She's already awake," she said. Daniel frowned. "Where?" Clara glanced toward the back of the house. "Office," she said. That wasn't unusual, but something in the way she said it was. Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee, took a sip, Then, did she say anything to you this morning? He asked. Clara shook her head. No, but she didn't look convinced. Daniel noticed. She hasn't needed to yet, Clara added quietly. That wasn't reassuring. From the hallway, footsteps, measured, unhurried. Victoria entered the kitchen like nothing had changed. Like yesterday had been a conversation about table settings. Like nothing had been said that couldn't be smoothed over by routine. Good morning, she said, her tone light. Clara inclined her head slightly. Good morning. Annie looked up. Good morning, Mrs. Hayes. Victoria smiled at her, a real smile. Warm, practiced. Good morning, Annie. Daniel watched all of it, carefully. Victoria moved toward the counter, pouring herself tea instead of coffee. A small detail, but Daniel noticed. She preferred coffee, always had. Today, something different. I've been thinking, Victoria said, stirring her tea slowly. Daniel didn't respond. He waited. Victoria turned slightly, looking at Clara, not him. I spoke with one of our associates last night, she continued. There's an opening at the Aspen property. Clara's hand stilled, just for a second, then resumed. Daniel felt it immediately. There it was. Higher pay. Victoria went on smoothly. Private quarters. Fewer staff. A more refined environment. Annie looked up, confused. What's Aspen? She asked. Clara didn't answer. Daniel stepped forward slightly. Victoria, but she continued. It would be a step forward, she said. A real opportunity. Now she looked at Clara directly. I thought of you immediately. The words were perfectly constructed. Polite, generous, reasonable. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Clara turned slowly, meeting Victoria's gaze. Thank you, she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, careful. But I'm fine here. Victoria tilted her head slightly. I'm sure you are, she said. But this is more than fine. This is advancement. Clara didn't respond. Victoria took a sip of her tea, unbothered. I'll need an answer by the end of the week, she added. There it was. Not a suggestion. A timeline. Daniel set his cup down. That's not happening, he said. Victoria didn't look at him. Daniel, she said lightly. This isn't your decision. He stepped closer. It becomes my decision when it affects people in this house. Victoria turned then, slowly. And since when? She asked. Have you involved yourself in staffing decisions? Daniel didn't hesitate. Since yesterday. A pause. Victoria studied him, then smiled faintly. You're reacting again, she said, and you're manipulating the situation. Her smile didn't fade. If I were, she said, it wouldn't be this obvious. Daniel held her gaze. That's the point, he said. Victoria's eyes flickered slightly, just for a second. Then, she looked back at Clara. This is your choice, she said. Not his. Clara stood very still. Annie looked between them, sensing something, not understanding. Daniel didn't speak, not this time, because he remembered what Clara had said. Let me decide. Clara took a breath. Slow, measured. Then, I'd like some time, she said. Victoria nodded immediately. Of course. Too easily. Daniel saw it. Clara saw it. The trap wasn't in the offer. It was in the space around it. Victoria set her cup down. Take a day, she said. Think about what's best for you. For your daughter. There it was. Clear now. Not hidden. Annie frowned slightly. Are we going somewhere? She asked. Clara knelt beside her. No, baby, she said softly. Not right now. Annie nodded, but she looked at Daniel again. Searching. Daniel didn't look away. Victoria turned toward the door. Conversation over. Control maintained. But just before she left, she paused. And Clara, she added, without turning back. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. Then she walked out. The kitchen fell silent again, but not the same silence. This one had direction. Weight. An edge. Daniel exhaled slowly. Clara stood still for a moment longer, then moved again, as if nothing had happened, but everything had. Annie looked up at her, then at Daniel. Are we in trouble? She asked quietly. Clara smiled. Soft. Careful. No, she said. But Daniel knew. That wasn't the real question, and it wasn't the real answer. Because trouble didn't always look like something breaking. Sometimes, it looked like an opportunity, and that made it harder to refuse. Daniel didn't follow Victoria. That was the second thing that changed. A day ago, he would have. Not to argue, not to confront, just to manage, to smooth, to keep things from becoming something larger than they needed to be. Now, he stayed where he was, in the kitchen, with Clara, with Annie, with the thing that had just been placed carefully in the middle of the room and disguised as opportunity. Clara moved first. She always did. Not quickly, not reactively. Just forward. She poured Annie a glass of juice, set a plate in front of her, adjusted it slightly as if placement mattered more than the conversation that had just unfolded. "Eat," she said gently. Annie obeyed, but slower this time. Watching, thinking. Daniel leaned back against the counter. "You don't have to consider it," he said. Clara didn't look at him. "I said I would," she replied. "That doesn't mean you should." Clara finally turned. Her expression wasn't defensive. It was steady, measured. "You said it yourself," she said. "It's my decision." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I know." A pause. "But that doesn't mean I have to like it." Clara almost smiled. "Liking it isn't part of the equation." Annie looked between them again, then raised her hand slightly, like she was in school. "Can I ask something?" Clara nodded. "Yes, baby." Annie hesitated. Then, "Is Aspen far?" The question landed softer than it should have, but heavier. Clara knelt beside her again. "Yes," she said gently. "It's far." Annie thought about that. Would we have to go there? Clara didn't answer right away. Daniel watched her, carefully, because this was the real conversation, not the offer, not the strategy. A child asking what her world was about to become. "I don't know yet," Clara said finally. Annie nodded slowly, then looked at her plate, not upset, not scared, just processing. Daniel pushed off the counter. "I'm going to the office," he said. Clara looked up. "To talk to her?" Daniel nodded once. Clara stood immediately. "No." The word came quick. "Firm." Daniel frowned. "We're not doing this in stages," he said. She made a move. "I'm responding." Clara stepped closer. "You responding is exactly what she wants." Daniel shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," Clara said quietly. "If you push back now," she reframes it, makes it about you interfering, about boundaries, about structure. Daniel's jaw tightened. "So I'm supposed to do nothing?" "I didn't say that." "Then what?" Clara held his gaze. "You wait." The word sat there. Uncomfortable, unfamiliar. Daniel didn't like it. "I'm not good at that," he said. "I know." A pause. "But this isn't about what you're good at." Silence. Annie watched them both. Then, "Mom?" Clara turned immediately. "Yes?" Annie hesitated, then said, "I don't want to go somewhere far." Clara's expression softened instantly. She pulled Annie into her arms. "You don't have to do anything you don't understand yet," she said softly. Annie nodded against her shoulder. Daniel looked away, just for a moment, because something about that, about how simple it was for Annie, and how complicated it had already become, didn't sit right. From the hallway, the faint sound of a door closing. Victoria again, moving, always moving. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then, "All right," he said. Clara looked up. He met her eyes. "I'll wait." Clara studied him, as if measuring whether that promise would hold, then nodded once. "Thank you." Daniel didn't respond, because it didn't feel like something that deserved thanks. It felt like restraint, and restraint was new. The rest of the morning moved differently, not slower, not faster, just aware. Daniel stayed in the house, didn't retreat, didn't disappear into work. He moved through rooms that suddenly felt less like his and more like something shared, something contested in ways that didn't involve ownership on paper. Clara continued her routine. Laundry, cleaning, small tasks that now carried weight because they might not be hers much longer. Annie followed her, quieter than usual, watching everything, learning something she wasn't old enough to understand yet. By late morning, Daniel found himself in the back hallway near the office. The door was slightly open, voices inside, Victoria's, and someone else, a man, low, professional. Daniel didn't intend to listen, but he didn't walk away either. "Timing matters," Victoria was saying. "I understand," the man replied. "But if the transition is framed correctly," she continued, "it won't raise questions." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "Transition, that depends on him," the man said. A pause. Then, Victoria's voice again. He'll adjust. Confident, certain, Daniel stepped back from the door. Not because he was finished listening, because he had heard enough. She wasn't reacting. She wasn't improvising. She was planning, carefully, deliberately, and he was part of that plan, whether he liked it or not. He turned away from the office, walked back down the hallway, slower this time, thinking, reframing, because Clara had been right. This wasn't something he could confront directly. Not yet. When he returned to the kitchen, Clara was standing by the window, still, not working, not moving, just looking out. Annie sat at the table, drawing something on a piece of paper. Daniel stepped in. Clara didn't turn. "She's already moving," he said. Clara nodded slightly. "I know." Daniel frowned. "You know?" Clara turned then, her expression calm. Too calm. "I've seen this before," she said. Daniel studied her. "Where?" Clara hesitated. Then, "Different house," she said. "Same outcome." That landed. Daniel stepped closer. "What happened?" Clara held his gaze. "They left," she said simply. "Who?" "The ones who didn't see it coming." Silence. Annie looked up from her drawing, then held it out. "I made something," she said. Clara took it, looked down, then smiled softly. Daniel stepped closer. "What is it?" he asked. Annie turned it toward him. A drawing. Simple. Crayon lines. 3 figures. Standing together. Holding hands. "That's us," Annie said. Daniel looked at it. Then at Clara. Then back at Annie. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. Annie nodded. Confident. Certain. "I told you," she said. "You help." Daniel exhaled slowly. And for the first time, he understood something clearly. This wasn't just about stopping Victoria, or protecting Clara, or fixing something that had already been set in motion. This was about staying, about not letting something be taken apart quietly, about not walking away when it would be easier. He looked at the drawing again, then at Clara, then at Annie, and this time, he didn't feel uncertain, not even a little, because whatever came next, he wasn't going anywhere. The house did not feel the same that afternoon, not because anything visible had changed. Everything was still in place, polished wood, quiet hallways, sunlight falling through tall windows like it always had. But beneath that, something had shifted into motion, and once something begins to move quietly, it rarely stops on its own. Daniel spent the next hour in the study, not working, not reading, just sitting. The drawing Annie had made rested on the desk in front of him. 3 figures, simple lines, holding hands, no distance between them, no hierarchy, no roles, just together. He had built an entire life around structure, around knowing where everything belonged. And now, a 6-year-old had reduced all of that into something clearer than anything he had ever designed. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the paper. Then, there was a knock. Soft, measured. He didn't need to ask who it was. "Come in." Victoria stepped inside, composed, as always, but different. Not colder, not warmer, just decided. She closed the door behind her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel didn't stand. Victoria didn't sit. They faced each other across the room like two people who understood that whatever came next would not be undone easily. "You've been avoiding me," she said finally. Daniel almost smiled. "I've been giving you space," he replied. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." A pause. Then, "You spoke to someone this morning," Daniel said. Victoria's expression didn't change. "I speak to people every morning. You mentioned a transition." That landed, just enough. Victoria stepped further into the room. Calm, controlled. "You were listening." Daniel didn't deny it. "I heard enough." Victoria studied him, then nodded once. "Good," she said. "Then we can stop pretending this is unclear." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "It was never unclear," he said. Victoria's lips curved faintly. "No," she said. "It wasn't." Silence stretched between them. Then, "You're making a mistake," Daniel said. Victoria didn't react immediately. She walked slowly toward the desk, stopped across from him, looked down at the drawing. For a moment, her expression softened. Not much, but enough to notice. "What is this?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. "Annie drew it," he said. Victoria looked at it again. 3 figures, holding hands. Her gaze lingered for a second longer than expected. Then, she straightened. "It's simple," she said. Daniel nodded. Yes. Victoria looked at him. And unrealistic. Daniel didn't respond. Victoria stepped back slightly. Daniel, she said, her voice even, this situation cannot continue as it is. He met her gauze. Why not? Victoria's expression sharpened. Because it's unsustainable, she said. For everyone involved. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Or just inconvenient. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. You think this is about convenience? I think it's about control. That landed. Victoria exhaled slowly. Then, of course it is, she said. No denial. No deflection. Just truth. Daniel sat up slightly. At least you're honest about it. Victoria's gaze held his. I've always been honest, she said. You just chose not to see it. Silence. Then, she's not leaving, Daniel said. The words were quiet, but final. Victoria didn't flinch. I haven't asked her to leave, she replied. You're going to. I'm offering her something better. Daniel shook his head. No, he said. You're offering her something that removes her from here. Victoria's voice cooled. Yes, there it was. No disguise now. No careful language. Just intent. And you think that's acceptable? Daniel asked. Victoria held his gaze. I think it's necessary. For who? Victoria didn't hesitate. For me. The honesty hit harder than any argument could have. Daniel studied her. You're willing to disrupt her life, he said. And Annie's life? For what? Victoria's expression didn't change. For stability, she said. Daniel almost laughed. This isn't stability. This is exactly that, she replied. You just don't like what it requires. Daniel stood, slowly, deliberately. What it requires, he said, is removing someone who hasn't done anything wrong. Victoria stepped closer. And keeping her here requires something else, she said. Daniel frowned. What? Victoria's voice dropped slightly. Blurred lines. A pause. Complications. Her eyes held his. And history that doesn't stay in the past. Daniel didn't look away. This isn't about history, he said. Victoria's expression sharpened. Don't say that like I don't understand what I saw, she said. Silence. Heavy. Then, you think this is about feelings, Daniel said. Victoria's lips pressed together. I think it always is, she replied. Daniel shook his head. No, he said. This is about right and wrong. Victoria let out a quiet breath. That's a luxury, she said. Daniel frowned. What is? Believing those are always separate things. That landed. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Victoria stepped back, reclaiming distance. I'm not asking for your agreement, she said. I'm informing you of the direction this is going. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't get to decide that alone. Victoria's expression softened slightly. Not in kindness. In certainty. I already have. Silence. Then, what happens if she says no? Daniel asked. Victoria met his eyes. Then we adjust. How? Victoria didn't answer right away. And that was the answer. Daniel felt it. Understood it. The shape of what came next. The quiet pressure. The narrowing options. The kind of choices that didn't feel like choices at all. He exhaled slowly. This isn't going to end the way you think it will, he said. Victoria tilted her head slightly. It rarely does, she replied. A pause. Then, she turned toward the door. But before she left, she looked back. At him, at the drawing, at the space between them. You're not the only one who knows how to hold a line, Daniel, she said quietly. Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. Daniel stood there for a long moment, then sat back down. His eyes fell to the drawing again. 3 figures, holding hands. Simple, uncomplicated, unrealistic. He exhaled slowly, then reached forward, and placed his hand over it. Not to cover it, to hold it in place, because for the first time, he understood something clearly. This wasn't just about whether Clara stayed, or whether Victoria. This was about what kind of man he was willing to be. When doing the right thing stopped being easy to explain, and started becoming difficult to defend. He looked at the door, then back at the drawing, and quietly, without saying it out loud, he made a decision. He wasn't going to let this be reshaped. Not quietly, not carefully, not at all. The decision didn't feel dramatic. There was no moment of clarity that arrived like a storm. No sudden shift that made everything obvious and clean. It came quietly, the way most real decisions do. Daniel stayed in the study for a while after Victoria left. not moving, not rushing to act on what he had just resolved, because this time, he understood something he hadn't before. Action wasn't the same as control, and control was exactly what Victoria expected him to try. So he didn't go after her. He didn't call anyone. He didn't try to stop what was already moving. Instead, he stood up, took Annie's drawing with him, and walked out of the study. Not toward the office, not toward confrontation, toward the back of the house, toward the part of the house that had never belonged to him in the way everything else had. He found Clara in the small sitting room near the staff quarters. She wasn't working. That was the first thing he noticed. She sat by the window, hands folded in her lap, looking out at the yard as if she were trying to memorize it. Annie sat on the floor beside her, building something out of mismatched blocks, quiet, focused, humming softly to herself. Clara didn't turn when Daniel entered. "You spoke to her," she said. Not a question. Daniel stepped further in. "Yes." Clara nodded slightly. "I figured." Silence settled between them. Then, "And?" she asked. Daniel looked at Annie, then back at Clara. "She's not going to stop," he said. Clara's expression didn't change. "I know." He stepped closer. "She's already planning the next step." Clara exhaled slowly. "I know that too." Annie looked up briefly, then back to her blocks. Daniel watched Clara carefully. "You've been here before," he said. Clara didn't answer right away. Then, "Yes." Daniel frowned slightly. "And you still stayed?" Clara turned her head then, looked at him. "I stayed until I couldn't." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Daniel held her gaze. "I'm not going to let it get to that point." Clara's expression softened slightly, but there was no relief in it. "That's not something you can promise," she said. Daniel stepped closer. "I can try." Clara shook her head gently. "That's not the same thing." A pause. Then, "Daniel," she said quietly, "this isn't just about whether I stay here." He frowned. "Then what is it about?" Clara looked at Annie, at the small world she was building on the floor, carefully, patiently, without knowing that someone else had already decided it might not last. "It's about what happens when staying costs more than leaving," Clara said. Daniel didn't respond immediately, because that was harder to argue with. From the floor, Annie spoke without looking up. "I don't want to leave." The words were quiet, but clear. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest again. He crouched down slightly, closer to Annie's level. "You might not have to," he said. Annie looked up at him. "Promise?" Daniel hesitated, just for a second, because promises were dangerous, especially when they involved things you didn't fully control. But Annie didn't see that. She only saw him, waiting, trusting. "I'm going to do everything I can," he said. Annie studied his face, then nodded, satisfied, because to her, that was enough. Clara watched the exchange, and something in her expression shifted. Not resistance, not acceptance, something in between. Daniel stood again. Then, "I'm not going to fight her the way she expects," he said. Clara looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not going to react," he said. "Not directly." Clara frowned slightly. "Then what are you going to do?" Daniel hesitated, because the answer wasn't fully formed yet. But the direction was, "I'm going to make it harder for her to move you," he said. Clara studied him. "How?" Daniel looked around the room, then back at her. "By changing the structure she's relying on." Clara's expression tightened slightly. "That sounds like control." Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "It's exposure." Silence. Clara held his gaze. "Explain." Daniel exhaled slowly. "She's operating under the assumption that this is contained," he said. "Private. Internal." Clara nodded slightly. "It is." Daniel shook his head again. "Not anymore." Clara went still. "You want to make this public." It wasn't approval. It wasn't rejection. Just recognition. Daniel didn't answer right away. Because that was the line, the one that changed everything. If he crossed it, there was no going back. No quiet resolution. No controlled outcome. Just truth. And consequences. Clara stood slowly. Annie looked up again, sensing the shift. "Daniel," Clara said, her voice lower now. "That doesn't just affect her. I know. It affects you. I know. It affects me. I know." A pause. "And Annie." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know." Clara stepped closer. "This doesn't stay clean once you do that," she said. Daniel met her eyes. It's not clean now. Silence. Heavy. Real. Clara searched his face, looking for hesitation, for doubt, for something that might stop this before it started. She didn't find it. Why? She asked finally, not accusing, not defensive, just needing to understand. Daniel didn't look away. Because she's counting on you protecting yourself quietly, he said. Clara's expression shifted slightly. And I'm done letting that be the easier option. The words settled between them. Annie stood up slowly, holding one of the small blocks in her hand. She walked over, placed it on the table beside Daniel. Now it's stronger, she said. Daniel looked down at it, then at her, then at Clara, and for a moment, everything was simple again. Not easy, not resolved, but clear. Clara exhaled slowly. You don't know what this will cost, she said. Daniel nodded. You're right. A pause. But I know what it costs if I don't. Clara held his gaze, long, carefully. Then, she nodded once. Not agreement, not surrender. Acknowledgement. From the hallway, distant movement. The house continuing, unaware. Or pretending to be. Daniel picked up Annie's drawing again, held it in one hand, the block in the other. Simple things, but not meaningless. He looked at Clara, then at Annie, and this time, he didn't hesitate. Whatever happens next, he said quietly, we don't let her decide it alone. Clara didn't answer, but she didn't disagree, and that was enough, because for the first time, they weren't standing on opposite sides of the same problem. They were standing together, and that changed everything. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything turned. It happened in pieces, small, quiet, but deliberate. Daniel started with something simple. He stopped keeping distance. That afternoon, instead of returning to his office or disappearing into calls and schedules, he stayed in the main areas of the house, not hovering, not imposing, just present. It was a subtle change, but in a house like this, presence meant something. Clara noticed it first, not because he announced it, but because he didn't leave. He was there when Annie finished her lunch. There when she asked questions that didn't need answers. There when the afternoon light shifted across the floors and turned everything a little softer than it had been that morning. And that was already disrupting something. Because Victoria had built her control on patterns, and Daniel was no longer following them. By late afternoon, the first ripple appeared. The house manager, Mr. Collins, arrived in the sitting room doorway. He was a careful man, always had been. Mid-50s. Precise posture. Voice measured in a way that suggested he had spent years navigating expectations without ever stepping outside of them. Mr. Hayes, he said, with a slight nod. Daniel looked up from where he sat near Annie, who was drawing again. Yes. Mr. Collins hesitated, just slightly. Mrs. Hayes asked me to confirm your travel schedule for next week, he said. Daniel leaned back slightly. I haven't confirmed anything yet. Mr. Collins nodded. I understand, sir. She mentioned Chicago. Daniel glanced briefly at Clara, then back at Collins. I'm not going to Chicago next week, he said. The words were simple, but they landed. Collins didn't react immediately. Because this was new. I see, he said carefully. Daniel held his gaze. Is there something else? Collins hesitated again. Then, there's also the matter of staff adjustments, he added. Clara's hand stilled. Barely noticeable, but Daniel saw it. What about them? Daniel asked. Collins shifted his weight slightly. Mrs. Hayes has begun preliminary arrangements, he said. Nothing finalized. Daniel's expression didn't change, but, moving forward, there it was. Quiet, professional, controlled. Daniel stood slowly. Let me be clear, he said. Collins straightened slightly. Yes, sir. No staff changes are to be made without my approval, Daniel said. Collins blinked, not dramatically, but enough, because that wasn't how things had worked. Not recently. Understood, Collins said carefully. Daniel held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. You can go. Collins inclined his head, and left. The room fell quiet again, but not the same quiet. This one had consequences. Clara looked at Daniel. You didn't have to do that, she said. Daniel turned toward her. Yes, he said. I did. Clara shook her head slightly. You just made this visible, she said. Daniel nodded. That was the point. Clara studied him, and for the first time, There was something like concern that wasn't just about herself. From the hallway, footsteps again. Victoria. She entered the room without hesitation. Of course she did. She had been waiting, watching, calculating the moment. Her eyes moved from Daniel, to Clara, to Annie, taking everything in within seconds. I see we're having a discussion about structure, she said calmly. Daniel didn't sit back down. He stayed standing. Yes. Victoria's gaze shifted slightly. To Mr. Collins? Yes. A pause. Then, you overruled me. Not a question. A statement. Daniel met her eyes. I clarified something. Victoria's lips curved faintly. That's an interesting way to describe it. Daniel didn't respond. Victoria stepped further into the room. Staff decisions fall under household management, she said, which I oversee. Daniel nodded slightly. And I own the house. Silence. Sharp. Clean. Victoria's expression didn't crack, but something in her eyes shifted. That's not how this has worked, she said. Daniel held her gaze. It is now. Annie looked up, not afraid, but aware. Clara remained still, watching both of them, understanding more than either of them were saying out loud. Victoria exhaled slowly. Then, you're making this public, she said. There it was. Recognition. Daniel didn't deny it. Yes. Victoria studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Then let's not pretend anymore, she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it changed. Less polished, more direct. You're choosing her, she said. Clara's breath caught slightly. Daniel didn't look away. I'm choosing what's right. Victoria almost smiled. That's not the same thing. It is to me. A pause. Then, Victoria looked at Clara, directly, not dismissing her, not minimizing her, seeing her fully now, as part of the conflict, not just a piece of it. You understand what this becomes, she said. Clara metargaze. Yes. Victoria tilted her head slightly. And you're willing to stand in the middle of it? Clara didn't answer immediately. Then, I've been in the middle of it longer than you think, she said. That landed. Victoria's expression sharpened, then softened again. Recalibrating. Always recalibrating. Very well, she said. A pause. If we're removing discretion, she turned back to Daniel. Then we proceed differently. Daniel didn't move. Meaning? Victoria's voice was calm again, controlled. Meaning this is no longer just a household matter, she said. Daniel's jaw tightened. What are you planning? Victoria met his gaze. The same thing you are, she said. A pause. Clarity. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Annie looked between them again. Then quietly, she stood up, walked over to Clara, and took her hand, not out of fear, out of instinct. Clara held it. Daniel saw it. Victoria saw it too. And for a moment, just a moment, something in her expression flickered. Not weakness, something else. Then, it was gone. Replaced by control. Always control. This won't stay contained, she said. Daniel nodded. I know. Victoria held his gaze. Good. Then she turned and walked out of the room, not retreating, not defeated, moving forward, on her terms. For now, the silence she left behind felt different, not uncertain, not fragile, just real. Clara exhaled slowly. Annie leaned into her side. Daniel stood where he was, and for the first time, there was no illusion left, no careful balance, no quiet compromise waiting to be found. This had crossed into something else, something that couldn't be undone, and whatever came next wouldn't be quiet. The house didn't wait for the next day to change. It happened that evening, quietly, but not subtly. By the time the sun dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the windows, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to awareness, like everyone inside the walls understood that something had crossed a line, even if no one had said it out loud. Dinner was different again, not just quiet, structured, deliberately so. Mr. Collins had arranged the table himself this time, every detail precise, every placement intentional, as if restoring order could somehow restore control. Daniel noticed. So did Victoria. Clara moved as she always did, steady, composed, but there was a new distance in her movements now. Not from the work, from the room, from what the room had become. Annie stayed close to her, closer than usual. Daniel took his seat without waiting. That, too, was new. Victoria entered moments later, on time, no delay, no performance. She sat down, folded her napkin, and began eating as if nothing had fractured. That was her way. If something couldn't be avoided, it would be contained. Mr. Collins informed me of your decision, she said calmly, without looking up. Daniel didn't touch his fork. I made a clarification. Victoria nodded slightly. Yes, she said. You've been doing that a lot today. A pause. Then, I've made a few of my own. Daniel's eyes lifted. What does that mean? Victoria placed her fork down, gently, controlled. It means, she said, that this situation is no longer internal. Clara's hand tightened slightly around the edge of the serving tray. Daniel leaned forward. Explain. Victoria finally looked at him. I've scheduled a review, she said. With the board. The word landed. Heavy. Daniel's expression hardened. This isn't a corporate matter. Victoria tilted her head slightly. Everything connected to this house is a corporate matter, she replied. You built it that way. That was true, and it made it worse. What kind of review? Daniel asked. Victoria's voice remained even. Operational structure. Staffing integrity. Leadership alignment. Clara went very still. She understood immediately. Daniel did too. You're escalating this, he said. Victoria didn't deny it. Yes. Silence. Sharp. Daniel leaned back slightly. You're going to put her in front of them, he said. It wasn't a question. Victoria held his gaze. I'm going to put the situation in front of them. Clara spoke then. Quiet. Controlled. And what happens after that? Victoria turned her head slightly. Looked at her. Not dismissing her. Not ignoring her. Including her. That depends, she said. On what? Clara asked. Victoria's eyes held hers. On how it's presented. The meaning was clear. It always had been. But now, it was spoken. Annie looked up, not understanding the words, but understanding the shift. Mom? She said softly. Clara didn't look away from Victoria. I'm here, baby. Daniel's jaw tightened. This isn't about structure, he said. It's about pressure. Victoria didn't react. It's about accountability, she replied. To who? Victoria didn't hesitate. To the system you built. That landed harder than anything else she had said. Because it was true. Daniel had created the world they were now standing inside. And Victoria was using it exactly as it was designed. A long silence followed. Then, do they know everything? Daniel asked. Victoria's expression didn't change. They know what they need to know. Clara exhaled slowly. That was the answer she had expected. And feared. Annie looked between them again. Then quietly, are we in trouble now? No one answered right away. Because the truth was complicated. Daniel looked at her. No, he said finally. We're not in trouble. Annie studied his face, then nodded, because she believed him. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Victoria picked up her glass, took a small sip, then set it down. The meeting is in 2 days, she said. Daniel's eyes snapped back to her. That's not enough time. It's not supposed to be, Victoria replied. There it was. No more pretense. No more careful language. Just strategy. Daniel leaned forward. You're forcing this. Victoria met his gaze. I'm finishing it. Clara set the tray down slowly, then stepped forward, not into the center, but close enough to be heard. I won't lie, she said. Victoria looked at her. I didn't expect you to. Clara held her gaze. I won't make this easier for you. Victoria's expression didn't shift. I didn't expect that either. A pause. Then, Clara nodded once. Good. Annie tightened her grip on her mother's hand. Daniel looked between them. Something in the room had changed again. Not just conflict. Alignment. Lines drawn clearly now. No confusion left. Victoria stood, ending the conversation, as she always did. With that settled, she said, we'll proceed. Daniel stood as well. This isn't settled. Victoria looked at him. It is, she said. Then, she turned and walked out. The door closed behind her. The room stayed silent, but not empty, not uncertain, just waiting. Clara exhaled slowly, then looked at Daniel. This is what I meant, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. I know. Clara's eyes searched his. This is bigger than us now. Daniel didn't deny it. Yes. A pause. Then, are you still sure? She asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes. Annie looked up at both of them. Then, are we still staying? She asked. The question was simple, but it held everything. Daniel crouched slightly, met her eyes. Yes, he said. Annie nodded. Satisfied, Certain, Clara watched him, and this time, there was no doubt left in her expression, only understanding, because whatever this had become, it was no longer something either of them could step away from. Daniel stood again, looked toward the door, toward the direction Victoria had gone, toward what was coming, then back at Clara and Annie, and the quiet, fragile certainty between them, the kind that didn't come from safety, but from choice. "This isn't going to be quiet," he said. Clara shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "It won't." And for the first time, they didn't hope it would be, because some things needed to be seen. The morning of the review arrived without ceremony. No announcement, no visible preparation. And yet, everything in the house felt aligned toward it. Daniel woke before sunrise again, not restless this time, not uncertain, just ready. That was new. He stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at the quiet stretch of the grounds, the same trees, the same gravel path, the same stillness that had once meant control. Now it felt like something else, a pause before impact. Behind him, the room remained untouched, perfect, ordered, and for the first time, he understood how little that mattered. Downstairs, the house was already awake, not loudly, but deliberately. Mr. Collins moved through the hallway with quiet efficiency. Phones had already been checked, messages delivered, schedules confirmed. The system was running, exactly as designed. Daniel walked into the kitchen. Clara was there. Of course, but she wasn't working. Not yet. She stood by the table, hands resting lightly on the surface, as if grounding herself before the day began. Annie sat beside her, swinging her legs again but slower this time, her eyes more watchful than usual. Clara looked up when Daniel entered. No surprise, just recognition. "It's today," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Annie looked between them. "What's today?" Clara knelt beside her. "It's a meeting," she said softly. "Like school?" Annie asked. Daniel almost smiled. "Not exactly," he said. Annie considered that. Then, "Do I have to go?" Clara shook her head immediately. "No, baby. You'll stay here." Annie nodded, then looked at Daniel. "Will you be there?" Daniel met her eyes. "Yes." Annie thought about that, then nodded once. "Okay. Simple. Certain." Clara stood again. Her eyes moved to Daniel. "You don't have to do this the way she expects," she said quietly. Daniel leaned against the counter. "I'm not going to." Clara studied him. "What does that mean now?" Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the answer had changed. Not in direction, in weight. "It means I'm not just defending you," he said. Clara's expression shifted slightly. "Then what are you doing?" Daniel held her gaze. "I'm telling the truth," he said. A pause. "Fully." Clara went still. "That's not the same thing." "I know. It's worse." Daniel didn't argue, because she was right. From the hallway, footsteps. Victoria. She entered the kitchen already dressed for the day, sharp, composed, every detail in place as if nothing unpredictable could exist around her. But Daniel saw it now. The control wasn't just external, it was effort. "Good morning," she said. Clara inclined her head. "Good morning." Annie followed quickly. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes." Victoria smiled at her. Warm, effortless. "Good morning, Annie." Then her eyes moved to Daniel, and held. "Everything is ready," she said. Daniel nodded. "I'm aware." A pause. Then, "I assume you've decided how you want to approach this." Daniel didn't look away. "Yes." Victoria studied him, for a moment longer than usual, then nodded. "Good," she said. "Clarity helps everyone." Clara remained still. Annie looked between them again, sensing something, not understanding. Victoria turned toward the door. "Car leaves in 20 minutes, she said. Then she stopped, just before stepping out. "And Daniel," she added, without turning back. "Once this starts, it doesn't stop." Daniel's voice was calm. "I know." Victoria nodded once, then left. The room settled again. Clara exhaled slowly. "This is it," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Annie slid off her chair, walked over, took Clara's hand, then reached for Daniel's. Small fingers, steady. "Don't let them be mean," she said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Daniel crouched slightly, met her eyes. "I won't," he said. Annie studied him, then nodded, satisfied, because to her, that was enough. Clara watched them. and something in her expression shifted again. Not fear, not doubt, something stronger, something quieter. "Be careful," she said. Daniel stood. "I will." But they both knew. Careful wasn't the point anymore. The car ride was silent, not uncomfortable, not tense, just focused. Victoria sat beside him, reviewing documents on a tablet. Her expression unchanged, her posture exact. Daniel didn't look at her. He didn't need to. He already knew what she was bringing into that room. Precision, control, narrative. He brought something else. Not strategy, not control. Something simpler and harder to manage. Truth. The building came into view slowly. Glass, steel, order. The physical version of everything Daniel had built over the years. He stepped out of the car first. Victoria followed. Neither spoke. They walked inside together. But not together. Not anymore. The conference room was already prepared. Board members seated. Files in place. Expectations set. Everything aligned. Waiting. Daniel paused at the door for just a second. Not hesitating. Just acknowledging. This was the line. Once he stepped in, everything would be seen. Fully. Clearly. No more quiet. No more contained decisions. Just consequence. Victoria moved past him. Took her place at the table. Composed. Ready. Daniel followed. Sat down. Looked around the room. Faces he knew. People who had trusted him. Who had believed in the system he created. And now, that system was about to be tested. Not by numbers. Not by performance. By truth. Victoria began. Of course she did. Her voice smooth. Controlled. She laid out the structure. The concerns. The need for alignment. Everything precise. Everything reasonable. Everything incomplete. Daniel listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't react. He let her finish. Because this time, he wasn't here to argue. He was here to reveal. When she was done, the room settled. Eyes turned to him. Waiting. Daniel didn't rush. He placed his hands on the table. Looked at the people in front of him. Then, he spoke. And for the first time, he didn't choose what was easiest to defend. He chose what was hardest to deny. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was already listening. That was the first thing he noticed, the difference between being heard and being understood. For years, he had built influence on being the former. Today, he needed the latter. "I'm not here to dispute structure," he began, his tone even, steady. "I'm here to clarify what's being hidden behind it." No one interrupted. Victoria didn't move, but her attention sharpened. Daniel let his gaze move across the table, faces he knew. People who had trusted him not just with business, but with judgment. "That house," he continued, "has always been presented as an extension of the system we run here. Efficient, controlled, stable." A pause. "That's not what's happening." A subtle shift in the room. Not disruption. Interest. Measured. Victoria leaned back slightly, her posture still composed, but her eyes now fully on him. Daniel didn't look at her. "Not yet. What's being framed as a staffing adjustment," he said, "isn't operational. It's personal." Now, the word landed. Personnel. The one thing corporate systems were designed to avoid. One of the board members, an older man seated near the end of the table, leaned forward slightly. "Daniel," he said carefully, "are you suggesting a conflict of interest?" Daniel met his gaze. "Yes." The room stilled. Victoria didn't interrupt. She was waiting, still controlling the moment, or trying to. Daniel continued. "A decision is being positioned as advancement," he said. "A relocation. Better conditions. Higher pay." He paused. "But the outcome is removal." Another pause. "Specifically, the removal of one individual from the house." The silence deepened, no longer neutral. Now, weighted, Victoria finally spoke. Calm, precise. "As I outlined," she said, "the proposal reflects long-term alignment. It's not unusual to reassign staff based on evolving needs." Daniel turned to her. Now, directly. "No," he said. "It's not." A pause. "But this isn't that." Victoria held his gaze. "Then what is it?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "It's a response." Silence. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something behind it tightened. "A response to what?" she asked. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "To something you didn't expect to be seen." There it was. Not accusation. Exposure. The room shifted again. Subtly. but unmistakably. Victoria exhaled slowly, then smiled faintly. A personal interpretation, she said. Not a structural concern. Daniel shook his head. No, he said. A factual one. A pause. Then, he made the choice. The one that couldn't be undone. This involves Clara Brooks, he said. The name entered the room fully now. Not implied, not avoided. Present, real. Victoria didn't interrupt, but her stillness changed. Daniel continued. She is not just a staff member, he said. The room waited. Every person at the table understood. This was the line. Daniel didn't look away. We have a history, he said. There it was. No room left for interpretation. No space left for control. The truth, uncontained. A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, but undeniable. Victoria's hand tightened slightly on the table. The smallest movement, but enough. Daniel didn't stop. Years ago, he said. Before this company. Before this structure. Before any of what we're sitting in now. A pause. She is also the mother of Annie. Another shift. Sharper this time. Questions forming. Connections being made. Victoria spoke then, her voice still controlled, but thinner now. This is irrelevant to the operational discussion. Daniel turned to her. It's the entire point. Silence. Heavy. Final. Victoria's composure didn't break, but it changed. No longer just control. Now, containment. You're introducing personal history into a professional environment, she said. Daniel nodded. Yes. A pause, because it was already there. That landed harder than anything else. The board didn't speak, didn't interrupt. They were listening now. Fully. Daniel leaned back slightly, not retreating, settling. I built this system to be fair, he said. To function without bias. Without personal interference. He looked around the room, and it does. A pause, until someone uses it to hide something else. Victoria's eyes held his. And you believe that's what's happening? Daniel didn't hesitate. I know it is. Silence. Then, the same older board member spoke again. Slower this time, more careful. Mrs. Hayes, he said, turning to Victoria. Is there any truth to what's being suggested? Victoria didn't answer immediately. That was the moment everything turned. Because, for the first time, she had to respond inside a system she didn't fully control. She straightened slightly, composed, deliberate. Daniel has chosen to reinterpret a standard adjustment, she said. Through a personal lens. A pause. I've acted in what I believe to be the best interest of stability. The words were perfect, measured, reasonable. But now, incomplete. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't need to, because something had already shifted. The room wasn't deciding who was right. It was deciding what was real. And reality had changed. Another board member spoke. A woman this time. Sharp, observant. Why wasn't this disclosed earlier? She asked. The question didn't go to Daniel. It went to both of them. That mattered. Daniel answered first. Because I didn't think it was relevant, he said. A pause. And that was a mistake. He didn't look away. He didn't soften it. I chose distance over clarity, he added. And that allowed this to happen. Silence. Then, all eyes turned to Victoria. This time, she didn't answer immediately. And that was the answer. Not defeat, but shift. Because control required certainty. And certainty was no longer hers alone. Daniel exhaled slowly. Not relieved, not finished, but aware. The room had changed. The structure had shifted, not collapsed, but opened. And in that space, something else could exist. Not control, not manipulation. Something harder, something less predictable. Truth. When the meeting ended, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like exposure. Victoria didn't speak to him as they walked out. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more than anything she could have said. Daniel stepped outside. The air felt different, not lighter, just clearer. For the first time since Annie had stood at his door and said, "My mom told me you had to come," he understood what that had meant. Not just urgency, not just need, but choice, the kind that changes everything. Later that evening, when he returned to the house, Clara was waiting, not at the door, not searching, just there. Annie sat beside her, drawing again. Daniel stepped in. Clara looked up. Her eyes searched his face. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He walked close, looked at Annie, then at Clara, then said, "It's not over." Clara nodded. "I didn't think it would be." A pause. "But it's different now," he added. Clara held his gaze. "How?" Daniel looked at Annie, at the drawing in her hands, at the small, steady certainty she carried without question. "They can see it," he said. Clara exhaled slowly, then nodded once. That was enough. Annie looked up. "Did you help?" she asked. Daniel smiled slightly. "Yes." Annie nodded, satisfied. "I knew you would." Simple, certain. Clara looked at him, and this time, there was no distance left, no hesitation, just understanding, because whatever came next, it wouldn't be quiet, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest. And sometimes, that's the only kind of ending that matters. This story reminds us that true character is revealed not when life is easy, but when doing the right thing comes at a cost. It shows that silence and avoidance may protect comfort, but they often allow injustice to grow quietly in the shadows. Real courage is not loud or dramatic. It is the quiet decision to stand beside someone who has no power, even when it risks your own. The story also teaches that dignity is not given by status, wealth, or position, but by how we treat others when no one is watching. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that children often see the truth more clearly than adults they trust, they believe, and sometimes they call us back to the kind of person we were meant to be. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.